Majora's Mask is incredibly broken, but one glitch has always evaded speedrunners, and that's becoming a human in the first cycle. This would be huge since the first cycle is tedious and boring as you're just waiting for it to end so you can become a human and start the run. In 2021, the fabled skip would be found, but it came with a price as the method of attaining it had a problem, leaving more time to be saved if a better technique of achieving it could be found, and in July of this year, the unthinkable happened, and a faster method was discovered. Today we'll be looking at the glitches that got us here and how every time speedrunners encountered a roadblock, they smashed it to pieces. So let's start with the glitch that began this entire saga and rewind to 2014. Majora's Mask any % speedruns didn't always skip content in the game. In fact, back in 2014, runners still had to complete all 4 dungeons, as getting the boss remains was the only way to reach the moon, but there was one major glitch that saw frequent use. When you're looking into South Clocktown from West Clocktown, you can see an owl statue through the loading zone. In gameplay, owl statues serve 2 purposes, a way to save the game, and as warp points with the Song of Soaring, allowing you to fast travel to any statue you've activated. However, the statue you see from West Clocktown isn't the owl statue you interact with in South Clocktown. It's only there to visually represent what's in South Clocktown, as when you go through the loading zone, the game loads South Clocktown proper and the real owl statue. Using out-of-bounds glitches, players were able to get to this owl statue by avoiding the loading zone, and when they activated it, they noticed something strange. If you use the Song of Soaring after hitting the owl statue without activating any others, the default position will be set to the Great Bay, and you can warp there. This is because in the array that tracks the soaring location, the Great Bay is the first location in memory, so that's where it tries to send you since this statue doesn't have a warp location defined. However, in 2014, Indextic discovered that you could manipulate where the hidden owl statue sent you. While the glitch is active, if you open the pause menu and select a location on the map, then exit and bring up the Song of Soaring map, you'll see that the warp target has changed. This is because the cursor on the pause menu map and the cursor on the Song of Soaring map use the same value in memory. So by moving the cursor on the pause menu, you can affect where your warp location will be by using the hidden owl statue. There is a quirk with this, however, since there are a different number of map icons than there are owl statue locations, highlighting a specific map icon won't take you to that location when using the Song of Soaring. Instead, it warps you to whatever that cursor value is in the soaring index, so selecting Deku Palace will warp you to the mountain village, for example. This glitch was called index warping, and it had another oddity. If you highlight the Z or R buttons on the side of the pause menu, then go into the soaring menu, the highlighted locations wouldn't be anywhere close to a legit warp target, and if you tried to warp to them, the game would soft lock. It wasn't understood why the soft lock happened or even what was going on, but this was the best way of getting around in early Majora's Mask speedruns, and in 2019, it only got better. Because speedrunners discovered this video's sponsor, Factor. Factor is like a speedrun skip in real life since it takes the hassle out of meal prep by letting you skip the grocery store, food prep, and cooking. Instead, you receive chef-crafted and dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your front door with keto, calorie-smart, vegan, and vegetarian options. With over 35 meals to choose from each week, there's something for everyone, but meals aren't the only thing Factor offers. Snacks, breakfast, smoothies, and juices are all part of the Factor family, so if you need something to grab on the go, it has you covered. And Factor's plans are flexible, letting you change your plan each week, so if you want to skip food prep 3 times a day, you can order 18 meals, or if you already have plans, you can order as few as 4. Factor also sources 100% renewable electricity at their production sites and offsets their delivery emissions by 100%, making them a green option as well. Thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring today's video. Use my link to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. And with that, let's get back to the owl statue index warp. When looking into the index warp, Fash and Exodus would discover what was going on when using the Z and R buttons. If you select R on the map, then go to the soaring menu, the game was increasing your soaring index value by 1. So if you quit out of the soaring menu and repeat the process, you could keep incrementing your soaring index value 1 digit at a time. But what does this achieve? When you warp with an owl statue, the game does 2 things. First, it looks up what location you're targeting, then it looks up an array of strings for text that matches this location and puts listed in the dialog box. The dialog box only has room for 200 bytes worth of data, and if you keep incrementing your warp index value using the map trick, it gets into garbage data. When data is larger than it's supposed to be in memory, it's called an overflow glitch, and with the help of MrCheeze, they figured out a way to manipulate some of this data. We don't need to get into all of the technical details, but the basics are that they're manipulating the RAM so that the string being used as a location name will overflow in a way that's beneficial, and to do this, they need to unload objects from memory while putting link in precise positions. We'll dive into what these actions are doing later. For now, all you need to know is that it's manipulating the RAM in a specific way, because once it's ready, all we need to do is increase our soaring index to 73. This is very tedious, as you need to go to the map, select R, then bring up the soaring menu just for one increment. But once you're at 73, if you let the warp execute, you'll then have access to a very broken debug menu. Players are then able to give themselves almost any item or object they desire, and by putting the remains from each of the 4 temple bosses into their inventory, they could go to the end of the 3-day cycle and be taken to the moon where they fight the final boss. While this glitch was powerful, it had 2 drawbacks. The first is that it only worked on the Wii U since it allows the use of the D-pad, as the Wii Virtual Console and GameCube versions had the D-pad disabled, meaning you can't navigate the debug menu on those versions. Also, it didn't work on the N64 version at all due to that version crashing. And the second issue is that the debug menu glitch still required you to complete the first cycle. In Majora's Mask, the game takes place in a 3-day cycle, and on the first cycle, you're stuck as a Deku scrub until you play the Song of Time at the end of the 3rd day. This is a problem, as you can't use most items as a Deku scrub and don't get the Ocarina until the end of the first cycle, so it needs to be completed in order to get access to the Index Warp. However, later in 2019, the Index Warp would become a thing of the past, as Exodus and Fash found a way to warp straight to the moon without a debug menu. While the Index Warp was fast, it wasn't very efficient as it requires a ton of setup, but thankfully, the owl statue wasn't just a little broken, it turns out it was completely busted. While looking deeper into the owl statue, they realized something interesting. The ID table that tracks which owl statue you saved at only has 10 entries, one for each of the owl statues in the game, but the table itself has room for 16 entries, so 6 of the spaces are unused. If you're loading a save file, the game needs to find out what owl statue to spawn you at, so it looks up the ID of the owl statue you last saved at, then looks up the entrance ID that corresponds to that owl, which tells it what loading zone to use. Since the 6 entries beyond the 10 intended owl statues use garbage data if they're selected, where they warp you can vary. And the 14th owl statue is interesting, as the data it uses can change, resulting in warps that range from the mayor's office to the hag's potion shop, and even Majora's lair. Warping to the final fight of the game would be fantastic, but there's one problem. How do we get our owl statue ID set to the 14th and have it warp us to Majora's lair? And the answer is by finding the first useful instance of stale reference manipulation in Majora's Mask. Stale reference manipulation, or SRM, isn't one specific glitch, but rather any glitch that results in a stale reference. In the code, there are variables called pointers that store the memory address of objects, and problems arise when the object they are referencing gets unloaded or deleted and the pointer is still referencing the deleted object. This is called a stale reference, and if something else gets loaded into memory where the previous object was, the pointer will interact with whatever took its place. When it comes to the owl statue, Exodus and Fash wanted to load it into the place of another object they were unloading, so they could manipulate where the statue sent you when you were loading a save, and they found an interesting solution. By bomb hovering into the Great Bay, they get the Zora mask early, and once in Zora form, they have access to the fins, which act as a boomerang, allowing them to pick up items from a distance. Every frame that an item is returning to Link, the game has to update its position data, which means it needs a pointer telling it where to update that data in memory. If you carry an item through a loading plane while it's off camera, and the item being carried gets unloaded, the result is a stale reference. This is due to a bug in how off-screen actors are unloaded, and in this case, the Zora fins continue to write position and angle data to the unloaded rupee. By performing this glitch at the loading plane near the owl statue, it's possible to unload a rupee and have the owl statue get loaded in over the memory address the rupee was at, resulting resulting in a stale pointer that's writing position data to the owl statue. In particular, the pointer is affecting the part of the code that decides which owl statue you will load at when you load a save. So with a precise position, you can manipulate this data, but they also need to play exactly 6 notes on the ocarina. Remember how the owl statue warp table only has 10 locations but has room for 16? The SRM glitch they use set the ID of the owl statue to the 15th entry of the table, which has a few possible locations it can load you at depending on some other data. And coincidentally, the function that counts how many notes you've played on the ocarina is very close to where the stale reference is writing data. By playing exactly 6 notes, they have the ocarina note counter write the exact warp value that they need, and once they reload the save with a precise position, they'll find themselves not just on the moon, but in Majora's Lair for the final boss fight. This started a boom in Majora's Mask speedrunning, and routes were being developed incredibly fast, with multiple glitch hunters coming together to figure out an SRM setup in Deku Palace that exploits where the Deku Guard sends you when you're caught, putting you not just outside of the palace, but on the moon. 10 months after this, it was discovered by FullGrownGaming and MrCheeze that grotto exits were a good candidate for SRM as well. These were incredible developments, but they still required completing the first cycle to get human form and then traveling to another area. But in 2020, something would happen that eliminated one of these roadblocks. FullGrownGaming, imbued Riley and Seedborn would find a route that avoids making a large detour by using a different low-level programming exploit. While this new route skips traveling to Akana or the swamp, it does need to get through the first cycle, and to speed up this process, there are some built-in options available to speedrunners. By talking to Granny in the Stockpot Inn and listening to one of her stories, you'll skip ahead to the morning of the next day, as without the all-night mask you'll fall asleep. But this only gets you to the dawn of the 3rd day. To pass time on the final day, you need to go to the trading post and dance with the Scarecrow, which takes you to the final night. These built-in skips get you to the end of the first cycle, which is the only way to get the ocarina, a key item for the new route they found that uses arbitrary code execution to warp you to the credits. Fighting Majora takes time, so any route that gets you directly to the credits is preferable, and arbitrary code execution, or ACE, is a glitch that lets you do almost anything you want. How it works is quite simple. Using exploits, you set up your own code in the game's programming, then find a way to execute that code in real time. To show you how powerful ACE is when combined with SRM, we only need to look at Ocarina of Time, where glitch hunters have used it not just to warp to the credits, but to create custom bosses and even pre-rendered cinematics. Before the Majora's Mask team created custom cinematics, they first wanted to break the game, and the fastest way they found to do this was by altering the cutscene that gets loaded when you play the Song of Time. For certain cutscenes, you'll notice that the background is all white. This is the cutscene map, and it's used for a bunch of different scenes, with the developers loading different objects into it depending on the ID of the event causing the cutscene map to be loaded. When you play the Song of Time, the cutscene value it tells the game to load is 8, and while changing the ID will only get you to different cutscenes from the cutscene map, that's only half of the equation, as the game also looks at the entrance ID that tells it which pool of cutscenes it should be loading from. In this case, the ID of 8 isn't what the glitch hunters wanted to change, as there aren't any cutscenes from this pool that get you to the credits. Instead, they wanted to change the entrance ID to Termina Field, as the 8th cutscene from this pool is the first that plays when the credits start. This was a crazy way to do a credits warp, and the first route that implemented it was made by Seedborn, where he discovered that Link's angle and the angle of the last Z target you did could be used with SRM to make an ACE payload you then execute with the ocarina. But this required going to Akana. To perform a faster one, you needed to go to the Astral Observatory. To unlock the Astral Observatory, you need to complete the Bomber's Quest, but this takes time even with glitches, and the fastest way to get there is by glitching through the fence in Termina Field. So why is the observatory important? It's the closest location with a loading plane connecting 2 rooms, making it the fastest place to set up SRM after turning human. In particular, the moon's tier on the upper floor is getting loaded over a pot, letting them write data into it like they did with the rupee and owl statue. By modifying a pointer associated with the moon's tier, they can change it so that the moon's tier executes Link's angle data as code, and since they can control Link's angles, they can alter what this code does. Using Link's angle data, they get the game to look at their file names, which then executes them as code that modifies what the Song of Time does when it's played, making it so it takes you to Termina Field instead of the cutscene map. All that's left after this is to play the Song of Time, and instead of going back to the dawn of the first day, it kills the moon and frees Termina, since the 8th cutscene for the Termina field pool is the credits. This was a powerful combination of SRM and Ace, but it still had one problem. The first cycle still needed to be completed as the ocarina was required. However, in 2021, Turkenheimer would look into eliminating this final roadblock. While looking at the Deku Scrub's abilities, Turk noticed that if you charge a bubble too long, it will pop, therefore getting unloaded, and surprisingly, he found a way to write over the bubble before its pointer could be removed from memory. The essentials are that the bubble you are charging has a pointer that gets deleted if you charge it for too long and it pops. However, if you pop the bubble during a cutscene where Link is frozen, such as catching a Bomber Kid, the bubble will pop without getting deleted, resulting in a stale reference. If you can pop the Majora balloon that's nearby, one frame after closing the Bomber Kid's text box, the smoke explosion will load into the same memory spot as the bubble you are charging, maintaining the stale reference. So what did this achieve? In this instance, it didn't give runners direct access to a credits warp. Instead, it corrupted the cursor position on the pause screen. This allowed the game to read data it shouldn't be accessing as inventory, letting you equip garbage to your C buttons, except in this case, the bytes from your file name are read, so they use specific file name characters that allowed them to equip any item they wanted. This can all be done on the first day, but because of the requirements of what they're going to do next, they need to progress to the second day with the Scarecrow, where they then head to the swamp. This time, a bush getting picked up as you're super sliding is the SRM catalyst, and they'll use it to alter the grotto entrance so it warps them to Majora's lair, as the freedom for a credits warp wasn't quite within their grasp using this method. While this route was a huge breakthrough, it did have a number of issues as it required you to leave Clocktown for another area, and even though it was faster, you once again had to fight the final boss, so there was room for potential improvement. Additionally, this was done on the US version and not the Japanese, and Ace credits warps need to be done on the Japanese version since it has the file name characters required. Second, this SRM route was done on the Virtual Console, where Ace is almost impossible due to emulation inaccuracy. And third, Turk's human in first cycle route doesn't get the ocarina, so you still have no way of executing a credits warp even if you solve the first two problems. There was a chance this was going to be the final route for Majora's Mask any % unrestricted. It was fast, and the problems in the way of making it faster looked to be impossible to solve. So I guess it's a good thing Exodus returned and found a way to turn human in the first cycle without SRM. If you can get a mask in the first cycle, turning into a human becomes a lot easier, but as a Deku Scrub, not many mask quests are open to you. However, there's one mask that you can access on the third day, if you can get inside of the laundry pool room. The Keaton mask is picked up during the Anju and Cafe side quest after doing some of the prerequisites and talking to the Curiosity Shop owner on the final day after the back room becomes unlocked. But if you can get into the room on the final day without doing the quest to unlock it, the shop owner will still give you the mask. This is what Exodus set out to accomplish, and using a precise spin to get out of bounds, you can enter the locked door from the back, getting you inside of the room on the third day to obtain the Keaton mask early. While in Deku form, Link can't use most items aside from bottles and trade quest items, so even with a mask, a way needed to be found to use it, and fortunately, the developers forgot to lock the C buttons in one instance. Honey and Darling run a shop that offers a different minigame on each day of the cycle, and on the third day, they offer a target shooting challenge. Since the other two minigames require the use of bombs, this is the only one you can perform as a Deku Scrub, and the developers forgot to lock the C buttons while you're playing it. So if you get the Keaton mask, then enter the Day 3 minigame, you're able to turn human in the first cycle without any SRM. But there was one problem. We still didn't have an ocarina. All of the pieces to get to the credits existed, there just wasn't any way to execute a credits warp payload without the Song of Time cutscene. However, MrCheeze knew it was possible, and he found a new setup. There's a unique cutscene that will only play near the end of the first cycle, and the important detail is that it takes place in Termina Field. Due to its location, the cutscene is listed within the Termina Field cutscene pool, and his plan was to change its ID to the 7th cutscene from that pool, as that's the credits cutscene. So how did he plan on executing the payload? That's the genius of this setup. Because he swapped the cutscene's ID in the code itself, he only needed to wait until it played naturally, at which point he'd be taken to the credits. However, this is a speedrun, and speedrunners hate waiting. so it's only natural that a day later he found a way to execute the cutscene without having to wait. With further modification of his payload, he was able to set it up so that going into first-person mode and looking up would set the cycle time to 5 minutes before midnight. To stop setting the time, all you needed to do was look down and time would proceed naturally, at which point the game will go to load the special first cycle cutscene, which is now set to play the credits. Using this route, the previous record has already been beaten by 13 seconds, with the new record standing at 17 minutes and 14 seconds at the time of this video's posting. Considering that the first 6.5 minutes of the runner cutscenes, that's insane for a run that's only 11 minutes of actual playtime. And while I was editing this video, Jtown would hit the first sub 17 in the game's history. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next exciting episode of Abyssoft Z.